My name is Mark Lawrenson, and I'm here with Richard Granite and Stephanie Kimbrough. And we're active in the American Bar Association's eLawyering Task Force, which is a group that's existed for about 12 years now, I think, to focus on how lawyers can use modern technology to practice, especially the internet. So what we want to do today is just take you through some basic concepts of practicalities of delivering legal services online. And before I start, I want to get a sense of the folks in the room. How many of you actually are current law students?
Recently finished.
Recently finished.
And Shannon is the editor of the Law Review.
Okay.
And they're doing a technology-based topic for their journal this year.
Oh, excellent.
So you can ask for a little bit more about them.
Okay, good. And everyone else is a practicing lawyer or a member of the bar? Any faculty members? Okay. So we're going to try to pitch this at somewhere in between. Part of our approach is to encourage present law students to take this stuff seriously, because this is the world you're going to merge into in practice. But also young attorneys, recently admitted, and other practitioners who are trying to figure out a way to survive or prosper in this current environment will find this very interesting. So I'm a lawyer, a Massachusetts lawyer. I don't practice anymore. I spent many years at Harvard as a clinical teacher and a researcher, and now I run a software company that builds systems that mostly other lawyers use. So I've kind of followed an unusual trajectory into that practice. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I run it was probably the first virtual law firm in Maryland in family law. I actually live in Florida, long distance. I'm also co-chair with Mark of the eLawyering Task Force of the ABA, which is the focus in the ABA to really help lawyers figure out how to deliver legal services online and reach out to what we call the latent market. And what I really do is I run a company called Direct Law, which provides a virtual law firm platform for lawyers, mostly solos and small firms, to enable them to deliver legal services online. And during this presentation, we'll try and give you an understanding of what we really mean by delivering services over the internet and how that's really different than traditional law practice.
I operate a virtual law office in Wilmington, North Carolina. I provide unbundled estate planning to my clients online. And then I'm the co-founder of a software called Virtual Office Technology, or VLO Tech, which we sold to Total Attorneys in the fall of 2009. And so I also work not only on my virtual office serving my clients online, but I help other attorneys set up virtual law offices.
So Richard and Stephanie are among the most experienced people in the world in actually running a practice. I mean, Richard operates a practice in Florida, but he's practicing in Maryland. That's where his clients are.
I don't see clients face to face, so it's only a strange kind of practice, but we can talk about it.
Whereas Stephanie works at a home-based office for the most part, serving clients across North Carolina. So we're going to get into more specifics, but that's the quick intro. So maybe we should just, Richard, you want to take this one, the basics?
Well, I think let's go through some definitional stuff about what's a virtual law firm. What do we mean by e-lawyering? How does that really fit in? And some of the other, what I call some basic concepts. You know, people, when they think of a virtual law firm, sometimes they think of somebody who's just being on email and who's kind of working out of their home and just meets people down at Starbucks and is just roaming around. We don't call that virtual lawyering. We call that an untethered lawyer, meaning that they're really doing, they're just not in a physical location, but they're still using traditional methods of getting to clients by either email or by telephone. When we talk about a virtual law firm, we're talking about a specific kind of web architecture, which we call the client portal, where a client signs in with a username and password into a totally secure space. Within that secure space, the client then can do things with their lawyer. They can collaborate, they can get legal advice, they can assemble documents, they can have their documents stored in a confidential manner, they can pay their bills online. So in a way, this space is an envelope which is totally secured. If you think about it, it has to be totally secured if you're going to secure somebody's confidential data. And if we're going to respect, which we'll talk about, the ethical requirements that our profession really imposes on us, to respect the confidential data, and to also make sure that the lawyer-client relationship is created appropriately. So within that client portal, lots of things go on. And it's not really rocket science if you think about it. Because every time you do online travel at Expedia, you sign up to Bank of America, you go to Charles Schwab, what you're doing is you're signing on to your own individual space. And this happens in almost every other industry except the legal profession. In my view, the legal profession is now on a spectrum all the way here, and everybody else is here. It's the one service industry that has not really developed this concept of the client portal where you can relate to your clients online. What we see in the legal industry is primarily websites which we call brochure websites, which are the equivalent of a yellow page ad, which describes a lawyer and their background, and they're passive, they're not interactive. There's nothing about those websites that enable the delivery of what we call legal services online through the internet as a platform. So what we're talking about here is something which is new, and we predict that in 3 to 5 years, and Stephanie probably agree with me. Most law firms are going to survive and prosper, particularly as you have a connected generation that expects to deal with their lawyers online, will have some form of a client portal. So when you have a client portal, it does change the way in which law is practiced. You can't read that, so Stephanie, why don't you go through that about a little bit what a virtual law firm is not?
Well, all of the things that I'm mentioning could be added and used with a virtual office, but in and of themselves, they're not exclusively virtual law practice. And Richard mentioned, physical location, using different e-lawyering tools for mobile devices and going to a coffee shop and practicing. That's the untethered lawyer. You can do that and have a virtual office, but that's not virtual practice. LegalZoom, when I first started practicing law online, I got accused of being a mini LegalZoom. That's not what I do. I'm not just a document farm selling legal documents to my clients. There's actually a relationship that's established between the client and I, just as you would in a traditional law firm setting, through to when I give them the legal services and they pay me. It's an entire process. So I'm not the same thing as an online legal service company. Also, a lot of times you hear about virtual law firms in the context of Axiom law or Ryman law or virtual law partners out of California. And these are virtual law firms in the sense that the attorneys themselves are using technology to communicate and collaborate amongst each other, but not necessarily to deliver legal services to the clients online, like a virtual law practice does. But some of them may have client portals for their clients, but they don't market and hold themselves out as virtual law offices. Rented office space, like Regis offices, where you may lease an office space temporarily or share it with another attorney, have a virtual receptionist. Those in and of themselves are not virtual practice. Second Life, for example, is in a virtual reality world. That's also not what we're talking about when we talk about a virtual law office. We're talking about real world law, not virtual reality law. Sometimes people get confused with that. And we're not talking about GoToPC or LogMeIn, these different client extranets or VPNs. Larger firms have had these for years where you can access the firm's computer remotely. That's also not virtual practice, but it could be used in a virtual practice. Just a few distinctions. And it makes a difference when we get to the ethics section to understand what a virtual practice is, because it will affect some of those ethics and best practice issues.
So one way of thinking about this is, in a typical law practice, you're meeting with clients face-to-face, you're talking to them on the telephone. That's the platform under which legal services are delivered. It's usually a face-to-face relationship. In this virtual law firm context, the platform is the internet. And we don't think that the platform is going to switch entirely to the internet. There'll always be this face-to-face component. But as the Generation Y becomes older and they have legal problems, and they grew up basically texting, they don't actually really want to talk to you face-to-face. It's you, right? You don't want to deal with anybody face-to-face. You just want to get the job done. You're going to see a generational shift where the platform for the delivery of legal services actually becomes the internet itself through the use of these technologies. And when the platform changes, if you don't adapt to it, you tend to be out. And the people who adapt to it tend to be it. I use an analogy sometimes about WordPerfect. WordPerfect thought they were going to be around forever until MS Word introduced a graphical user interface. And they said, oh, don't worry about that. Nobody's going to be interested in the graphical user interface. 10 months later, WordPerfect was dead. And the reason for that, what happened, the platform shifted from a text-based computer to a graphical interface. We think that's what's beginning to happen. Not going to happen tomorrow, but it'll happen within 3 to 5 years. Within this context of the client portal, there's something that goes on which we call eLawyering. eLawyering is like a subset of the tasks that happen within the client portal. Turn this over to Mark, because Mark has really defined what eLawyering is a little bit.
One way to define it is just to think about all the things that lawyers do, interviewing and counseling clients, negotiating, advocating, drafting. And for all of these verbs of lawyering, there are corresponding examples, right? So now you can do online interviews, interactive questionnaires for clients that can branch based upon their answers and drill down and gather more information. There are now online document assembly systems that can take that information and produce first drafts, either for the client or for the lawyer. There are online dispute resolution systems, online education. So all of these things we've done in our careers now have been mediated by these new technologies.
So if you're paying bills online, we don't call that e-lawyering, but it happens within the client portal. E-lawyering is specifically about lawyers' work and how essentially a digital application can transform a lawyer's work, can help a lawyer be more productive, or in some cases, as you'll see, can actually substitute for a lawyer. So the question then often becomes, if you can use the digital application to substitute for the work of a lawyer, is that the practice of law, or is it not the practice of law, or can other people do it? But we're now seeing the development of these digital applications is now happening faster because of the internet. If I had to develop a digital application, like a document assembly solution, and just use it in my little solo practice, it would be too capital intensive for me to do it. But now with the internet, it's possible to distribute these applications to thousands of different, in this case, lawyers, or thousands of different consumers. So the internet by itself transforms the economics of creating complex digital applications which heretofore could not be developed in individual law firms. So we have a very powerful economic transformation. And we believe we're going to see the proliferation of these digital applications, which will be delivered in some cases within the context of a client portal, but also may be delivered by non-lawyer providers, like something like a LegalZoom. So then we talk about what is some of the online legal services that we talk about. These are the things that Mark was suggesting. We can assemble legal documents over the web. What does that really mean? It means that instead of talking to your lawyer on the telephone and the lawyer scribbling out on a yellow pad, what your name is, whether you have children, who you want to leave your children with, and then giving you a yellow pad to a paralegal, and the paralegal cuts and pastes a will together. The client basically goes in, types a set of questions out in an online questionnaire, and as soon as the submit button is pushed, that document is instantly created, except the client doesn't know it in most cases. So the technology changes the work process and changes the way in which legal work is done. We have things like web advisors that are now available, where you put in a set of facts and the conclusion is actually suggested. We have ways of essentially automating the legal advice process. So all of these have benefits. And we're going to do this short. This could be a semester-long course, put it that way. We're going to try and collapse a lot of concepts in a very short period of time. So when you think about what are the benefits of this, why do we want to do it? Stephanie, why don't you do that?
There are two different ways to look at benefits. The first is benefits for the public, and then benefits for the legal professional. For the legal professional, it allows you to expand your client base across the jurisdiction or jurisdictions where you are licensed to practice. So for example, I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is a really small town. Well, not really small, but small enough by the coast, and then Solo. So competition is tough, but when I open my virtual office, I am able to reach out. Most of my clients come from Charlotte, Durham, Raleigh, Greensboro, which are 3 and 4 hours away from where I live. So it gives me an advantage over the other solo practitioners in my town. Lets me tap into that larger market of potential consumers that are online. So I work with some attorneys who are licensed in several states who are able to expand their reach in 2 or 3 different states based on their licensure. So that's one of the big benefits. It's also eco-friendly. You can have a more paperless law office. So I won't say I'm completely paperless because the Bar Association and my malpractice insurance carrier still send things by mail, but I don't have to print documents out. I don't have all the office supply expense. So overhead is minimal for what I do because it's all online. Probably one of the biggest benefits too is flexibility. I'm able to work when it's convenient for me to work, and that ends up being a benefit for my clients as well because I can see when they register in their client portal when they want to work with me, and usually it's 5 o'clock in the morning or it's really late at night once they've got their kids to bed, or they're not having to take time off work, paying for childcare to have their legal needs met. They can do it online 24/7 whenever they want. So it's convenient for them, and it's convenient for me as well if I need that type of flexibility in my life to juggle family and career. I can do that with a virtual practice. And I work with other attorneys, and some of the reasons they want to set up virtual offices include transitioning between careers. A lot of them have just graduated and passed the bar, law school, they can't find that dream career, and they will look at opening a virtual office as a way to start learning the law, finding online mentors. Also, unfortunately, the last couple of years, I speak with a lot of associates who are laid off from larger law firms who can't find another job or they're kind of in transition. They will open a virtual office to keep practicing, maybe take a couple clients with them. And recently, I speak with a lot of baby boomers who are sort of looking at ways to get out of their firm, but they want to do a little more traveling and retire slowly. So, for example, I spoke with one partner who wants to take a couple of his homeowner association clients with him and use a virtual firm to continue to work with the board of directors for those HOAs while he's traveling and outside of the physical law office location and sort of transition into the next phase of his life and his career. So a lot of different reasons why lawyers want to choose a virtual law practice, and a lot of benefits for them in terms of flexibility. The benefit for the public that's probably the biggest is greater access to justice. The convenience, the affordability, we should say that's probably the biggest. And recently, the ABA has a commission, Ethics 2020 is what it's called, and they are submitting proposed rule changes to the model rules. And in one of the comments, they actually wrote and acknowledged that virtual law practice is one of the solutions to our access to justice problems. So I thought that was a really great acknowledgement from the ABA that this form of law practice is important.
That's really one of the 2 driving themes for this task force of ours. One is that we have a chronic problem in this country where the vast middle class has very little access to affordable legal services. And those that can't get free services, which are very few at the bottom, have to do without or suffer the consequences of being inadequately served. So being able to find new ways of delivering where the legal profession itself, as opposed to some of these alternative providers, can step in and provide convenient, cost-effective service across the board is a major change. And the second thing, of course, is that the profession is being attacked by LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer and other players that are coming in and saying, hey, you don't need a stupid lawyer. Why pay for that money? You can get your will done for $200. And for some people, that's fine. But the profession is being blindsided, we think, by these new developments. They're using technology to come out and serve the consumer in a consumer-friendly way, in a convenient way. And most lawyers are still hanging back and not taking advantage of it. One last thing, Richard. Up until about 5 years ago, this was prohibitively expensive to do. I mean, if you wanted to set up the kind of environment that Richard or Stephanie had in the mid, say, 2005, you would probably have to spend several tens of thousands of dollars just to get this thing constructed and operating. Now it's possible to do it on a monthly cost of a few $100. So this is within reach of every lawyer. And whether it's a supplement to your practice or the sort of the beachhead for your new practice, it's now very feasible.
And I was going to say that we think that it's possible to structure legal services in a way using the technology to actually keep your profit margins off but lower the end price to the end user. And one of the reasons for that is the deployment of what we call SAS Technology, which is software as a service, which Mark alluded to. In software as a service, we are not developing this technology on our own. We are actually buying it from what we call third-party vendors who deliver the applications over the net and enable me to store my data over the net. So I don't have to actually spend money on hardware internally other than my personal computer or my laptop. I don't have to do expensive software. I don't need a third-party consultant. And one of the controversies which we think will get sorted out that lawyers are fearful of is, well, if I store my software out there, my data out there, what's going to happen to it in terms of confidentiality? That's another subject. But just when you just think about the technology, which is called SAS Technology, it enables you to deliver very complex technology to the smallest business unit. An example is something like Salesforce.com, which delivers sales and marketing technology to the smallest business unit. In this case, we have a new set of vendors that have emerged which deliver things like complex document assembly solutions, practice management solutions for a few dollars a month. So the cost of running your back office and running these client portals is really, it's minimal. One transaction covers the cost of doing this and has a very powerful impact in terms of your firm reaching out to new clients, expanding beyond your geographical base, and doing things that you couldn't do if you were just like in your own little, essentially in your own little neighborhood. Plus it gives you a competitive advantage because you know that 95% of lawyers are not going to do this right away, right? So the 5% of the lawyers that do it, it gives them an argument for it, basically reaching out to clients that this approach really appeals to.
So happy to have questions, by the way.
Yeah, you can interrupt.
If something hits you, you want to ask, put your hand up and just jump in.
Let's just move along further. So these are some of the online legal service applications that we've talked about that we see happening in this virtual law firm environment. To give you just one, anybody have any questions about what some of these things involve? You know what a web advisor is?
I don't know.
Okay. I want to file a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13. I don't know which one to do it. Normally I go to a lawyer, I sit with the lawyer, I give the lawyer a bunch of income data. The lawyer says, after 2 hours, you're eligible for a Chapter 17. Here's my bill for $300. Instead, I take the data, I put it into an online form. The software automatically calculates whether I'm eligible for a 7 or a 13. I get the answer instantly. That's a web advisor. Whether it's charged for or it's not charged for, it's happening. When you go on the net and it's for free, it displaces a task that the lawyer might have done previously, right? So the lawyer has to think of other things to do to make a contribution. But web advisors is something which is sort of like creating an artificial a document using a form of artificial intelligence. But instead, what's happening is you're getting at least a preliminary legal conclusion. It may not be sufficient for total legal advice, but gets you part of the way there.
And attorneys are using them sort of as a marketing strategy on their website. They'll add a web calculator or web advisor to give the prospective client just the information they want. Yes, I need estate planning. No, I don't. Or there's a law firm in North Carolina that has a very popular child support calculator that I know even attorneys go on to use to get a basic idea of how much you'll be paying in child support in North Carolina. So he uses that, and then when they get their answer, he's able to a lot of times convert them into a full-paying client because he offers that type of
child support 10 years ago, same process. You go to your lawyer, give him a bunch of income, he said, "Well, come back in a week, I'll tell you what your child support obligation is." He tell you what the obligation is, and here's my bill for $300. All that work's now been displaced. You can go onto many, many state sites, fill out a calculator, it'll tell you exactly what your child support obligation is based on your income, which is based on the statute. Those are the easy ones because they're calculations that are formulaic, that are based on a formula. But we can move into areas which are not so formulaic, as you could say, that are not so to a pure mathematical calculation. These applications, these happen within this context of the client portal. So when you visualize it, think of a website and think of a logon that says username, password, which we started with. That tells you that that law firm has developed or instituted some form of a virtual law firm capability that their clients can log into. So let's see what we're doing. Okay, here's an example of a client portal. It actually happens to be mine. Realize that, so. All right, so this is a tab. This is what a client sees when they sign in. This says legal documents, legal advice, resources, legal document review, collaboration, calendar, my account, and bills. These are functions that a client would do when they're in their own particular space. We're looking here at just a collaboration function where files are being shared. Every time there was a communication, there was a number that was assigned to the communication, and we'd have an audit trail. This was actually a form of legal advice that was being given. The client can upload a file. So I receive a document from somebody else on the other side. I want my lawyer to review it. I upload the file to this space. My lawyer goes into this space, reviews the document, then gives me a preliminary conclusion. May pick up the telephone and just talk to me about it, or can actually communicate securely within this space. So each of these things, like legal documents, legal advice, resources, think of that as an expanding area of functionality that the lawyer can do within this client portal piece. This is just a very crude example of document assembly. When the client goes and answers a set of questions on a questionnaire, basically what's happening is here, as fast as I do that, once that submit button is done, that document is immediately created, ready for the lawyer's advice, further revision, and further amendment to maybe conform it to the facts of the client's case. But what's happening here is that the lawyer gets a first draft instantly. Think about how much time is saved compared to the normal work process, the normal outdated, obsolete work process that most lawyers use in their practice. It would be like, like Henry Ford inventing mass manufacturing or some manufacturing process, and people still in the horse and buggy era. To me, lawyers, most of them, are still back in horse and buggy compared to what can be done and what is being done in almost every industry. So no wonder we have so much disruption in the legal profession. No wonder consumers don't like to deal with lawyers, because they see around them every other industry employing technology in innovative ways, and the lawyers don't do it, and the lawyers don't use technology in a way to reduce prices to them. Every major consumer behavior that consumers like, lawyers don't do. They're not efficient, they're not fast, they're not transparent, they're obscure, they're not trusted. It's going to end someplace. The people who are going to pay the most penalty will probably be solos and small firms. Now let's talk about the back office for a minute. Stephanie's our expert on the back office.
So my virtual office, because I work from home, my office is inside the application, so I have my own secure login, and I go in every day. And some of the applications I have on there, I have a library, a law library with different statutes that I refer to on a regular basis. A form library, not the same type of document, real robust document automation assembly program like what Rich uses. But I have HTML forms that I've kind of created myself for my clients to input the data online. I have different case and client management tools that I'm able to use to sort of sort through discussion threads with my clients to check and see what invoices are outstanding, when my clients, have sent me a message. So different ways for me to sort through the different work based on the client or the matter. I have jurisdiction, a lot of malpractice checks, a jurisdiction check, a conflict of interest check. A lot of these systems have that, where when a prospective client registers it and they put their zip code in, it will send up a red flag to them and let them know that I'm only licensed to practice law in North Carolina if they don't put in a zip code that's a North Carolina address. And then it sends me a red flag as well to double check the legal issue to make sure I can actually work with that client even though they're not physically located in North Carolina. So it has that type of check, a contact database that the clients can go and update. But I have all this within this portal, so I can travel on family vacation to Ohio and still communicate and work with my clients, because everything I need is inside there. All the documents that I would attach to their case file, everything is right there. And they can pay me online as well, so I can process payments, they can pay by credit card, and all of that's within the same system. This is just the clients, how they can be sorted, but I have a dashboard, it's a dashboard, contacts, matters, calendar, tasks, billing, and then documents. And there's a little timer, so that if I say have a web conference with them and it's not based inside this portal, I can start tracking my time, and then it will send a report that can go to that client's case file that says I can write on, I just had a web conference with them, this is what it was about. But if I do charge by the billable hour, it will actually auto-calculate the billable hour for me. I do fixed fee on my virtual office, so I don't use it, but it's still kind of good to figure out how much time I'm spending and how much it's worth.
It's useful to point out that this is happening not only in the small firms, but the biggest firms in the world are doing this kind of thing now. Certainly aspects of e-lawyering. This is, I think, Wilson Sonsini and Oric, two big California-based law firms, each of which has an interactive document assembly service for free for startups that take you through routine startup documentation. They don't even require you to disclose your identity to use them. And so they're giving it away. It's kind of a lost leader, but it's a very intelligent application that provides guidance, that generates documents that are usable, in the hope that they'll both get good public relations and that they may find someone say, gee, I've got a problem with this term sheet and I need legal advice and you guys are the experts. So this is happening across the spectrum. In the corporate law sector, this is an example from Cisco. They've got an in-house non-disclosure agreement generator. And again, a typical scenario, 5 or 10 years ago, to generate an NDA in the Salesforce for a new a conversation you're having, perhaps with a customer or a partner, the salesperson or the field person would contact the law department, get a document, have them draft something, put some custom language in it for this context, go back and forth before it was said, okay, this is fine to be signed. The other side may want to negotiate. And it would take maybe a week and a few hours of everybody's time. They put together one of these interactive document assembly systems in an NDA central location. And now field personnel can go and generate a compliant NDA in a few minutes that's been pre-blessed by the law department, as long as you color within the lines and answer the questions and make the choices. Bam, speed of business. So it's really knocked down incredible amounts of time and money inside the corporate environment. So another example. In the nonprofit world, there are a number of sites that are now making these forms available for folks who can't afford lawyers, either by courts or by legal aid programs. I've been involved in this thing called Law Help Interactive, which is a national service run by Pro Bono Net in New York. And this has several thousand templates being used in about 40 states for things like uncontested divorce, simple eviction defense, dealing with a creditor that's dunning you, various other routine matters, either for self-help or for some lawyer helping. And this system has generated about 500,000 documents for free on the web in the last several years. It's just the tip of the iceberg. So these things are coming from all places. We've got the non-lawyer providers like LegalZoom, we have the large law firms, we have the law departments, we have the courts and the nonprofits. So if you're a practitioner anywhere in this ecosystem, it's happening. It's happening all around you. And unless you find a way to embrace it, you're going to be swamped.
Let's change subjects. Talk a little bit about ethics.
The way that I break up the ethics issues are in two parts. The first is when you're looking to select a technology, doing your due diligence, researching and understanding that third-party provider, understanding how to have set up that technology, understanding the company. And then the second part is your actual use of the technology after you've implemented it in your practice. So for the first part, you can go to the next slide. But we have our duty under Model Rule 1.6a, pretty much every state, it's the same rule, to protect our clients' the confidentiality of our clients' information, to safeguard their property. And under this rule, it requires us to use reasonable care to do this. So this is the primary ethics rule when you're researching virtual offices and the technology that you're going to implement, that you need to keep in mind. How is the confidentiality of my client's information going to be protected? And in doing this, you need to research the company's service level agreement, understand how they handle confidentiality, how it's encrypted, who has access at the company to your law office data. but also understand the transfer of information. When you send it out there to that third-party provider, and it's transferred from them to, you know, the hosting company where the servers are located, just understanding that transfer of data and how the confidentiality is protected at all different levels. And you want to look for these types of provisions inside the SLA, data return and retention. If something happens to that technology company, how are you going to get your law office data back? Do they have some type of policy? Do they have a way for you to export the data so you can back it up in-house on your own? Just how do they address that issue? And then once you get it back, transferability of data as well, so that when you get it back, it's in a format you can actually transfer to another software program if need be. So a lot of these different provisions you need to look for. For guidance that goes much more in-depth on these, there's the Pennsylvania FEO 2210-200 last year. It's a 14-page opinion on virtual law offices, and it's really great because it talks about, and it is a Pennsylvania bar, but it talks in general about confidentiality of your data, doing your reasonable care, to research the technology that you're using. The ILSO standards are something you might want to keep an eye on. It stands for International Legal Technology Standards Organization, and last April they released a set of standards related to the use of technology in law practice. And very soon, I think Richard might know more about this, they're going to be releasing compliance. So when you're researching your tech companies, your legal solutions, you might want to look for the ILSO certification seal that shows that they understand these tech requirements and these concerns that attorneys have. So that's something to keep an eye on when they start doing that. Of course, the task force, we have a set of guidelines for cloud computing that are on the eLawyering.com website. Is that right?
And these slides will be made available if you want them. I think we're going to give them to the school, and you can find them online as well.
They have links
Yeah.
to all of this, but this will explain more of how you can do your due diligence in researching the technology.
It's really starting to explode. Just in the last year, this whole phenomenon is hockey stick in terms of public attention.
Yeah, I think really it comes down to minimizing your risk in delivering legal services online. You really have to determine on a case-by-case matter. Once you implement the technology, does this matter? Can it be handled online, or does the client need a full-service in-person representation?
Yeah, I think that there are two components here. We learned that something like only 52% of law firms, solo law firms, not two-person, but solo law firms, of which is about 400,000 in the United States, have a website. It means 48% of solos don't even have a website. So if you don't have a website, I mean, you're not at first base. You have to have at least a website if you're going to do anything online, right? So then the question is, you get your website done, how much does this client portal functionality cost to integrate it into your website and you integrate it with really a few lines of code. Normally what's happening is there's this log-on box and your code sits on the website, and then when the user logs on, they're moving into this other space. Well, depending on the functionality, the cost can be anywhere from $49 to $199 a month, a couple $100 a month. We're not talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking about something between $49 to $199. Our pricing starts at $99. If you're out of law school in the first year after you pass the bar, we reduce the price to $49 as an entry-level pricing strategy to get people into the system. So price in some ways is not a barrier. Your biggest cost in starting a law firm is actually your time cost, your own time to learn so you can figure out what it means to practice law, and to actually still get clients, not only on the web, because we don't believe that online marketing is the way in which you exclusively, in any sense, can get clients initially. Initially, you have to do what lawyers have always done, build referral networks, get referrals from other lawyers, build your own networking. In this competitive environment, it's too capital intensive to think just because you're going to put a website up there that you're going to get clients online. If your website can't be found, you're not going to get any clients. That means you got to be on the first page of Google. To get there, you really have to have some special understanding and special skills to have your website found. So normally, we think that the best models are still click and brick, which is the combination, click and brick, the combination of a traditional law practice where you go out and you make relationships and you build a reputation in the community for some of your expertise, that people actually begin to think that you know something about a subject area, and that you can be trusted in that area, and that you have some experience in that area. And then we add the virtual law firm component as a way of essentially expanding your reach and amplifying the messages that you can deliver to clients. So the virtual component really is not a substitute for being a lawyer in the traditional sense, but it can transform your work processes in your traditional law firm setting. When I say in the traditional sense, I mean, how lawyers get started out. Usually they end up with referrals of cases from other lawyers who trust their expertise. That doesn't really change in this environment. But cost is not really a barrier. I don't think it's really a barrier, even though for some people $200 a month is a lot. If you think about just picking up 1 or 2 cases, you can really buy this technology because of the way in which the SAS technology actually operates.
The biggest setup.
I mean, there's no upfront capital investment. There's no hardware or software to install. It's usually very easy to implement. It's subscription based. Usually, it's on a short-term contract. So you can start something, and if you don't like it, you can terminate it within 30 days. It's not like even a 1-year agreement is required. I'm sorry, Steph.
No, the website, I think, is probably one of the initial, when you're just starting out, investments in this, because you have to you have to build a nice enough website. It's your front door. Even if you're a brick and mortar practice, a lot of times people are searching for you online before they come to your practice physically. So I think initial setup cost really is that website, making it approachable and a resource.
I agree. It has to be attractive, or people will leave. They'll spend that 5 seconds and they'll go to somebody else's website. Attention span is very short. We usually do this presentation to lawyers in bar associations. So this section, you might find a little bit useful, is about how to really market your legal services online and what's really required. And we always say that it's important to still define a niche. We're talking about online, because the way in which Google and Bing find you is if you're a specialty. And a specialty is not, for example, divorce. A specialty is uncontested divorces, or a specialty is divorces of military personnel, if you know what I mean. Or you have to define yourself. It's not just, it's military personnel in North Carolina. That's a specialty. In other words, you have to define on your front-end website, in terms of the keywords that one uses, your little area of real expertise, because that's what the search engines really pick up. And it has to be what we call a client-centric website, which really means, I can't write for lawyers, you have to write for clients. Now, somebody hit somebody websites and just filled with a lot of words. In America, we're not that literate, right? I mean, people don't process text that well in America. It's still going to be true that the people who are attracted to some of these approaches have to be able to read, particularly if you're going to do things like they're going to represent themselves for part of the work, and you're going to do part of the work, and they have to follow your instructions well. If they can't read too well, they're not going to be able to follow your instructions too well, so they're going to screw up. So to the extent that you can use visuals, that still becomes important, I think, in website design. Social media is actually becoming more and more important in terms of getting the word out, and also having excellent content on your site. It gets very expensive to start using pay-per-click marketing on Google to advertise your site. You could easily run up a $22,000, $3,000 bill a month for a single site, which is really beyond the economics of what you want to do. So you want to drive traffic to the site. How do you drive traffic to the site? You drive traffic to the site by putting unique and remarkable content that people want to read on your site that's unique in your area of specialty. That gets picked up by the search engines, and then you use social media also to drive traffic to your site. So what that does, it engages people. Once they're engaged, you have a prospect that you have a chance of converting into a client. So that becomes a process. It's certainly a process that's beyond the scope of this session, but just to give you a feel for what we're trying to do here, which is to build an online presence. Basically, we're talking about having an online brand which is consistent with your offline brand. What are some of the potentials here? Mark has talked about this latent market for legal services, the huge number of people that really turn to other alternatives than lawyers to try and get their legal problems solved. We think that there's still a huge market out there that if you can figure out a way to serve that market effectively, you can capitalize on it. Right now, the people who are capitalizing on that market are companies like LegalZoom. I mean, you know about LegalZoom, right? Unless you've been asleep for the last couple of years. You haven't heard of it, you know. Robert Shapiro of OJ fame is constantly on cable TV telling everybody that the law is on your side, whatever that means. Here we have the biggest legal brand in America, and it's not even a law firm. And it's actually, not only that, it's well capitalized. Let me just go to the next one. Oh, wrong slide. They did 1 million wills in the last 4 years. They're the largest incorporator of America in terms of actually creating incorporations as an incorporation service. And it's been highly criticized because we don't know the content of what's coming out the other end, but somehow consumers like it. This is business that's being taken away from solos and small firms. It used to be the bread and butter of solos and small firms. This company just raised $66 million in capital. It's a huge amount of money, almost the size of the budget of the whole American Bar Association. And they have global plans to actually overturn unauthorized practice and law statutes in almost every state and to create a space for themselves. And they may be successful in doing that. What you have to do is to demonstrate the value of what it really means to be a lawyer, to be accountable as a lawyer. You're accountable, they're not. You can be sued under your malpractice policy if you make a mistake, they're not. You have to protect confidential information, they don't. What they sell, they warrant as is. You warrant that it's correct. The legal profession has to be more proactive in essentially selling that message of what our unique contribution is. And the way in which you sell it, again, is through an internet and essentially a connected strategy. And as we have a new cohort of web-savvy clients that are moving into this space, it becomes really, it becomes even more important to do this. Stephanie and I have what we call Pureplay virtual law practices. A Pureplay is where we never see a client face-to-face. We operate at a distance from our clients, but the only reason that we can do this is that we have respectably built specialized niche reputations, I'm not going into the detail, in the geographies in which we actually operate. It's really hard, I believe it's really harder to make it this way, that the way you really have to make it is to have a practice where you have the opportunity to still see clients face-to-face, and that you, as I indicated before, that you add the virtual component to it. This is, yeah, go ahead.
With you and Stephanie, then, did you start only having this Pureplay, or did you transition into it from different practice setting?
I went into it, I left a small firm and started it up on my own, but it took a full year before I started really building my online presence and seeing a more steady online client base. It's not easy, but I was the first in North Carolina, so I was able to capitalize on that and get a lot of press. I think my circumstances are unique to what I'm seeing most other attorneys experience if they have a completely pure play virtual office.
So this is an example of a consumer-friendly will site in Illinois, smarterwill.com. Now, it's done by a firm that has a regular estate planning practice on the ground, unlike Stephanie's. And they did this because they wanted to reach out to another cohort of the demographic of people who were looking for an online solution which was less expensive than the typical estate planning package, which costs $2,500 to $3,000. And the way it's working for them is maybe 30% of the people who come to this site for a will, power of attorney, living will, and a healthcare power of attorney, durable power of attorney, find that their problems are too complex to be done by the site. So they call up the firm and they make an appointment and go into the office. So they generated as much money as a consequence of this as the site itself. So it's had this kind of double impact. So they've had the full leverage of using the net, both for the online client and for generating a new stream of offline client. It's a well-done site. It's worth taking a look at in terms of information. There's a lot of how it works, why start a mill. There's a lot of good information in here which can provide a model for what we call the front-end consumer site. And when the login is sitting up, where's the login? I can't see it. Probably sitting up here someplace. That's how you get to the back end. This is the front-end site. You realize that we're talking about a front-end website, sits out on the internet, searchable by the search engines, and the client portal, which is in a secure space. So everything that we talk about here is this idea of how to build a strong brand online. And the way to do that is always to think niche, think differentiation, think how you can be unique, and to provide what we call a remarkable client experience. Because if you provide an excellent client experience, the word will go out. And you can't do that if you just have a passive website and you are just doing law practice the way it's normally done. Now, obviously, what I'm saying, I'm generalizing. There are certain kinds of practices which these concepts don't map perfectly against. So if I have a criminal defense practice where the credibility of the witness is critical to everything that I'm doing, I'm going to have a lot of face-to-face interaction. It doesn't necessarily lend itself, these concepts, to a document-intensive transactional practice. So we always suggest that these are tools. And what you have to do is understand the tools and then come up with a business plan. Then map the technologies against your business plan and see what works for your particular practice. There's no formula, oh, just going to do this. You really have to think about, these are the tools, how can I put these tools together to create a remarkable client experience? So you have to, there's a burden on you to learn enough, to learn more about how these tools work. And so there is a learning curve. And we have some resources that, want to mention some of these? This is basically, a challenge to you. Even if you're law students, if you're thinking about when you get out, it's never too early to think about the practice management issues. And in the old days, it was just what timekeeping and billing systems should I use? It's now become, frankly, more complicated. And these are hot links on these resources. Stephanie's written actually the leading book in the area, I can say, it's too modest, on virtual law practice, which I recommend reading. Mark's written a book on how to work smarter. There's the eLawyering task force, eLawyering.com, has lots of resources on the website. So this is more stuff to learn that you're not going to find in casebooks. But the reality is, I think I always say this, what it means to be a professional is they always have to constantly reinvent yourself. That's what it really means to be a lawyer. Every 10 years, you're going to be faced with reinventing yourself anyway. So now, we're faced with learning a little bit more about information technology and the internet. Mark and I have been doing this since 2000. We thought everything was going to take off in 2002. It's 2003. We're only off by about a decade. But in the last year, the technology somehow have fused together. And as Mark said, we've had a lot of real interest and a lot of things happening in this space. Stephanie put together a company which has a lot of firms using their services. We have 160 law firms using ours commercial. Go to directlaw.com. And if you want, you can sign up for the free trial. Anyone can sign up for a free trial. You don't need a credit card. When you sign up, software creates your little client portal. You can see, it's a 30-day trial. You can see what the lawyer sees about how to manage that office. You can see what the client sees. And it's usually we have the lawyers sign up, but law students, it doesn't make any difference. And we make an offer. If you have a clinical program and you want to use this technology in a clinical program, we'll make it available for free. Because it should be, in my view, a component of legal education. Mark is now doing, I should talk about that, the work that you're doing on legal apps and stuff.
Yes, one other initiative, we've got a thing called Apps for Justice, which has recently been funded, that's trying to put courses on this subject matter in every law school. It's remarkable how few law schools, I assume including this one, doesn't really have a course about how to practice using the modern tools, MetaMo,
The new tool.
to do eLawyering. So our hope is to, just like 30 years ago, there were very few clinical programs in law schools, and then suddenly they became ubiquitous. We're hoping to make the same thing true with the technology of law, because it's clear to us that's the future of the profession, it's the salvation we're not going to be able to survive as lawyers, let alone prosper, unless we really embrace all these kind of tools and the innovation that goes with them.
That's great.
Leslie?
When you were explaining it at first about, a client going into a portal, it was exactly what you were thinking. I was thinking about my bank account, and I do that. And I never really thought of it that way. We have a program at the school that the students use, Simplicity, and the alumni use, and that's how jobs are posted, and they apply to jobs, and they respond to workshops and things like that. And it's all focused with their username and password. It's the same concept that's obviously out there. I just never really thought about it before. But if you were doing this 10 years ago, was it because you have technology interest, or is it just that you're just an amazingly innovative, forward-thinking person? Because
there were a lot of people that were into this. Some of them were real techies who were enthused by the gadgets and the technology. Others just were very fed up with the state of practice, either their personal lives or the fact that so many people weren't getting service, and looking for new ways. So it's a real mixture. I don't think today you find a strong technical background is critical at all.
I don't have a strong tech background. My husband's a programmer, which comes in handy. He programmed the software that I use. That's how it all started. But I'm interested in technology. I'm interested in constantly learning about it. It's exciting for me. I think if you do this type of practice, you have to want to learn and keep up with it. It's sort of necessary. It becomes malpractice if you don't even. But my background's not really in technology or computer science. The reasons I did it were a combination. I was pregnant with my first child, so I wanted to get away from the firm and the billable hour and the traditional office setting, but then also I was getting frustrated with the practice I was at because of the large number of folks who would come to us who did not qualify for legal aid assistance, and yet I knew we could help them, but in the traditional billable hour, it wasn't cost effective for the firm, and we had to turn them away, but I didn't know where to send them. So, my personal needs plus the frustrations with that sort of combined into creating this. That's why I did it.
I actually have a background in kind of management and law practice. I took a degree in management. I taught law practice management at the University of Maryland and law school and computer applications in the law, so I was kind of interested in that intersection. This was like 1998, 1999, when the internet first began to take off. And then I left that to basically start these companies to do some stuff. But I've always been interested in the delivery of legal services, and I guess in our case, and also how to figure out, because I come from an access to justice background, how to figure out so that the 90% of the U.S. population can participate in the legal system effectively. So that my driver has always been this access to justice focus, and figuring out ways just to have the technology in service of that objective, which I think it does. I mean, the project that Mark's involved in, nobody really knows about it, frankly, but in the legal profession, I don't know about that. Like, the Legal Service Corporation has funded legal service agencies throughout the United States where they've taken staff and they have programmed in a very innovative way documents which are available for free, not for poor people, for anybody, through servers that are usually on statewide legal help sites. And they've generated, 500,000 or 600,000 documents? I don't know, how does the private bar feel about the Legal Service Corporation funding? They don't know about it, right?
Very little controversy so far. I think they know about it in some places. It's the same thing. I can imagine small firms resenting LegalZoom because they're coming in and they're providing very cheap forms. And they would probably feel some resentment for folks that are offering these things totally for free. So it's kind of a double whammy. But so far, because it's being targeted at poor people's problems,
Right.
It's not seen as eating into your revenue stream.
But it has had a very positive impact. It's been a really good strategy for giving people access, right?
Yeah, I think it proves that there's a lot of self-help possible on a sophisticated level.
And then there are things like some legal service programs have kiosks. To use the technology, have kiosks in community centers, and they'll use a paralegal or a non-lawyer to help a low-income person step through the questionnaire, and then give them some other legal information about how to represent themselves. And things like child support modification, routine divorce, guardianships, really very important things which affect their daily lives. And without this, they have nothing. right?
And if you hang out in almost any courthouse now, you realize these waves of unrepresented litigants that is desperately, just wandering around like deer in the headlights, not knowing what to do and being passed from office to office, and the court is having trouble dealing with them. So there's an amazing quantity of need for quality legal services that we're just not supplying.
Which areas do you feel are most ripe for this technology? I mean, everything, or, I mean,
I'm seeing a growth of virtual law firms that do intellectual property law, like federal practice, where they're not just bound to within one state jurisdiction. Immigration law is another one that's growing.
So estate planning, corporate law.
But
Transactional.
Transactional rather than litigation at this point. But that transactional work affects a lot of different areas of practice, from small business to family law, right? So I would say transactional work is probably 80% of what most lawyers do anyway, right? It's a smaller number does litigation.
We're getting near the end of our appointed time,
Oh, yeah,
so I just
okay.
wanted to ask if there are any other questions or comments.
Yeah.
Things that seem mysterious or controversial to you, Joe?
what's the typical, like you said, some of the information that a client is going to put into the portal is going to generate a first draft. And so, what's the typical, attorney-client relationship after that? I mean, it creates a first draft, or then does the client come in after that? Is there like a follow-up phone call, or is it more just goes whoever the client, sort of however the client wants to interact with? That's essentially.
No, typically a structured questionnaire picks up every bit of information that's needed to create the document. And if it's a true integrated document, assemble a solution. I mean, if it's a will, what's your name, who your beneficiaries are, every single question, right?
Sure.
And then that document is created instantly. Now, once the document is created, usually the lawyer will then communicate and review it. There are other questions, like due diligence questions, whatever, the lawyer communicates by telephone or email, or prepares the document for execution, sends execution instructions out with it. So it's not just a top-level couple of fields. It's a program piece of software, so that everything that's required to create that document is in it. That's why it's so powerful. And that's why, because document assembly today as web-enabled document assembly, meaning that you can do the questionnaire through the web browser, meaning that it's interoperable in a Mac and a Windows environment, right? It's got to be able to operate in all those environments. It's pretty well-developed technology. So practices that can take advantage of document automation can see some real productivity increases. But we'll see other kinds of applications, I think, in other areas of practice.
Does that include like an engagement letter or a fee agreement?
Well, it can, yes. You always have to, if you're doing a typical unbundled legal practice, where you're going to provide, let's say, legal document bundled legal advice for a fixed price, at the time that the purchase is made, there's a limited retainer agreement, which is accepted by the client. You can't do this without a limited retainer agreement. You have to have a writing. And then the writing can be exported, and then you can send it to them. There's a clear notice says, you have to accept this before you go on with the process.
My system's a little bit more manual. It's not just the click wrap, but I can also, if they want it, the click wrap is in the form of a limited services agreement. Click to accept, and that's our establishment attorney-client relationship.
Right.
But I can also send them a traditional written, like you would have in a law firm. A lot of the firms that I set up these virtual offices for, they'll want to do that. They'll want to use their regular standard written agreement, have the client sign it, scan it, upload it back to the, because they're still transitioning between the two. So you could do both, or you could do either or.
The other thing that I wanted to ask is, I saw that you had a practice, DC divorce.
Right.
Okay. Now you're down in Florida.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. But
I probably gather what the reason is.
No, the reason for the practice was I was instrumental in creating the pro se forms for the state of Maryland.
Okay.
So I was known by the court clerks when I was at the University of Maryland Law School. So I developed a little reputation for helping uncontested divorce clients in that process and giving them some legal advice. And the court clerks liked that. So I'm getting a referral stream from actually court clerks. They know, oh, go to MD Family Lawyer, he's a lawyer online to give you some legal advice. They don't know where I am, so that's why. So I don't, I'm not, if I have a conflicted case, I refer it out.
How do you handle court appearances?
I don't, that's my
That's
point.
what I,
My point is I never go to court because it's not really required. I tell them how to handle themselves in the hearing. It's a simple 20-minute hearing. And that's true of all the uncontested cases, including child support modifications that I do and a couple of other things. And of course, in wills in the estate area.
wills in the states, there's no court appearance.
Yeah. We just help, we
They
do
execute it on
execution.
their own.
We do execution processes, like we ask, send me the execution page that the notary does, so I want that for my files. I ask them to get that back, so I know that it's properly executed.
And DC has no physical office requirement,
No, or Maryland.
or Maryland. Some states still
But
do,
New Jersey does.
yeah, require a bona fide brick and mortar.
Which would increase your costs if you have to actually rent an office in the jurisdiction. So well, that's why I was making this point that you take the technologies and you figure out how it's going to work for your particular expertise and practice. There's no like blanket formula, you know, you really have to do some hard business planning work to see how you're going to make it work for you.
With that, I think we should wrap it up as far as our presentation. We'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody has questions, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.